This week, the future of development and rural boundary policies in Florida. Orange County leaders decide against putting a new sales tax on the November ballot that could have at least partially funded transportation and infrastructure projects. And the drought is set to continue this month across the state. This is Talking Central Florida. Hello, I'm Steve Mort. First, the future of development in Florida. In the last few days of the regular legislative session, lawmakers could consider whether to make it much easier to develop within Seminole and Orange County's rural boundaries. We should note we're recording this show on Tuesday, so things may change by airtime. To discuss rural boundaries and what could happen if a potential amendment to a bill on land use and development regulation succeeds are two reporters who've covered the rural boundary issue, Abe Aboraya from the Oviedo Community News and Molly Duerig from Central Florida Public Media. Good to see you guys.
Thanks for having me.
Great to be here.
Thanks so much for coming in. Molly, let me start with you first and just give us an overview, if you can, on what rural boundaries actually are and how Seminole and Orange counties came to have them in the first place.
Right. So generally speaking, rural boundaries are a planning tool that local governments may use to try and control and somewhat limit growth in designated rural areas, kind of a way of directing more intense development to urban areas and keeping the rural areas more rural. So a way of protecting agricultural land, natural resources, et cetera. And so Seminole Counties actually was initially written into the comprehensive plan back in 1991, but then voters approved it, formalizing it in the county charter in 2004. And then more recently in 2024, 74% of Seminole County voters, renewed the boundary and strengthened it even further, adding a kind of a supermajority requirement. A supermajority vote would be required by commissioners to change anything, take land out of the rural area or change the use of the land. So Orange County's is newer. We had 73% of Orange County voters approving a rural boundary in 2024. So similar idea there. But.
So the Seminole County one has been around more than 20 years now. It was just in 24 that they strengthened it at the ballot. So I guess it seems that it's a pretty popular kind of policy to have if you look at just how the votes broke down in all those elections.
Right. And I think in Orange County, it covers more than 50% of the county's land mass. So it's a good chunk of the county's land is included in the rural area. So, we see Central Florida, there's a lot of rural areas. People are very, passionate and dedicated to protecting those areas. So definitely.
So let's get into what's happening in the legislature. You write, Abe, that an amendment had been proposed that would give developers, quote, near automatic rights to develop in Seminole and Orange County's rural boundaries. That amendment was withdrawn, right, but you report that something like it could come up again when the full Senate discusses the Land Use and Development Regulations Bill. Explain what you're hearing about what such an amendment might seek to do.
So this is to SB 208, which deals with some development fees kind of separately from this. And this was an amendment that actually started from State Senator Jonathan Martin down in Lee County in Florida, down in the kind of like the Fort Myers area. So he started by asking the Attorney General, if these rural boundaries are, the legal status of them, if they were, okay or not. So the Attorney General put out just kind of an advisory opinion, and then that advisory opinion Jonathan Martin proposed as an amendment to SB 208. And like we've been talking about, he pulled that, and they're expecting to bring it back up again when SB 208 goes to a floor vote. And so kind of crucially, what this would actually do. So when you look at Seminole County, the rural boundary, it's sort of like east of the Econ-Lackahatchee River and east of Lake Jessup. And this would give them, like we've talked about, it's the actual terminology in there is a self-executing remedy enforced by courts. So this would allow a developer to say, okay, if my neighbor to my left, my right, or across the street that's not in the rural boundary, I get to develop to their level of intensity. And if I don't, then the county has to actually pay me the difference in what my land would be worth. And it actually goes a little bit further than that, too, because it's a mile away from you as well, inside the rural boundary. And that one, it's up to 75% of the density there. So right now in Seminole County, it's one home for every 5 acres for a lot of it, and then one home for every 10 acres. So it's pretty, low density residential that you can, if your house were to burn down, you can rebuild it at that. But The fear is that if this amendment ultimately gets approved, that you would sort of have these rural boundaries that would be eroded. And crucially, the county would basically, they don't have to prove anything in court. The landowner, this is basically, the law says, hey, this is a taking, you know, and so this is automatically done. And they, in addition to getting paid for it, they can also ask a court to pull them out of the rural boundaries. So they would also, in addition to being able to get paid for it, they would also still be able to develop that land.
Yeah, I want to get to the position of the state on this in a moment. I just want to note again, we are recording the show on Tuesday morning, so there is a chance that there may be movement in the Senate on this by the time the show airs on Wednesday evening. So let's sort of break this down, the opposition to rural boundaries down, I guess, into legal and philosophical parts. On the legal part, as you just mentioned there, Abe, I mean, how does the DeSantis administration and the Attorney General's office feel about this rural boundary issue, Molly?
Right. So the moment that you were referencing with Senator Martin. And then the Attorney General weighed in and said, this looks like it might be unconstitutional. And they were citing the Burt-Harris Act, which is a state law that lets property owners sue governments for damages if the government entity restricts or limits the land use in a way that negatively affects the property owner financially.
And there were some people when that opinion came out who initially raised the alarm saying, hey, we think this is going to end up in a bill. And it turned out that those predictions were right, which, it's... this whole kind of idea with it too, because with a rural boundary, you not just have, a decision about this as a rural area. In Seminole County, it allows it, if a developer were to try and annex into a city, which is what would typically happen in the past, you would have, okay, well, I'm designated rural by Seminole County. I will go to a city, get annexed into that city. I'll connect into their utilities, and I'll be able to develop more dense. This rural boundary in Seminole County says this rural area, our zoning applies even if, the city zoning is different, even if you annex in. So you would have to get out of this rural boundary with that supermajority vote. So it does make it more difficult to actually develop these lands.
I mean, many developers, of course, as you say, oppose these rural boundaries. They may support this kind of amendment. But the proposals that we're discussing here, do have the support of many lawmakers as well, including State Senator Jason Broder, who represents parts of Seminole County. Why do Broder and others say they support giving developers more rights in these rural boundaries, kind of on principle?
So when Jason Broder came out in support of this during that Senate committee hearing, he basically said, I have been a supporter of the rural boundary, but this Attorney General opinion swayed me on it. And so now I believe that this is a taking. And he basically said, hey, we could be here with a law that says, rural boundaries are not allowed, period, the end. And he basically told me, after this vote that he's worried that this Attorney General opinion is going to lead to the rural boundaries being unconstitutional anyway, and this is a way to kind of protect it by giving property owners, a way out of it. I will tell you, kind of philosophically, there's sort of this debate about, if I own land, it kind of rubs people the wrong way to have a government say you can't do what you want to do with it. There are places like Houston, Texas, where zoning regulations are basically non-existent. So, it's a thing that can happen in places as well. And that's, it's sort of akin to the argument you see where people say, well, if I'm paying property taxes on my house, do I really own it or am I leasing it from the government? It's sort of kind of a variation of the same sort of argument there.
Just expound a little bit on this issue of a taking and what that means.
So, I mean, the idea is, and I will say, when I was kind of looking through some of the stuff the Florida Bar has written about the Burt-Harris Act, it's a pretty high bar.
Yeah.
Courts have been pretty deferential to governments to say you are able to control land use. This is a proper function of government. And so if you kind of look back historically, this all sort of started with this idea of someone wanting to build in New York in Grand Central Station, building a tower there. And it went to the Supreme Court, and the Burt-Harris Act was intended to give property owners in Florida more rights. But, the idea with it there is that, if you were to, as a government, come in and say, you know what, this land is rural, we don't want anything on it. If your house burns down, you can't rebuild it. That would be considered a taking.
Okay.
And the argument that Seminole County's lawyers are making is that it's not a taking because you do have rights to develop your land. You can build that 1 house per 5 acres, 1 house per 10 acres. When the rural boundary was put in place, people got to keep. If you had the rights to develop something, you kept those rights, you get to keep the development rights. And there have been a few cases of properties that have come out of the rural boundary over the years. So it's not, near universal that no one has ever gotten out of it since it was enacted.
But of course, in Seminole County now, it requires this supermajority.
Now you have a supermajority, which does make it trickier.
If such an effort is successful, might this apply to other parts of the state? We've been talking about Seminole and Orange. Are other parts of the state in focus here?
Yes, and I base that it's a complicated bill, and it's based on the way they make some of the definitions in there. And I talked to some lawyers about this, and they think that because it defines a rural boundary as not just the rural boundary like we have in Seminole and Orange County that's in the charter. It also defines it as anything that's defined as rural in a zoning ordinance or a comprehensive plan.
So it doesn't have to be a county charter amendment.
It does not have to be the counter charter amendment. Now, the other end with that is because there is a plus sign. It's if it's in the comprehensive plan of a county or if it's in an ordinance, and there's an added requirement of a supermajority. So we know in Sarasota County, they have a supermajority, and down in Miami-Dade, they also seem to have a supermajority for certain parts of their comprehensive plan. So it looks like it at least would apply to a few other places outside of the state. And, there are some people who are worried that this, depending on how court interprets it, that it could apply to just comprehensive plans everywhere, which would be the entire state, which would be a totally different scenario.
Well, I mean, if an amendment on rural boundaries is like we're talking about here is successful this week, I mean, can counties do anything? Like, could attorneys for Seminole County actually be in a position to challenge it, do you think?
I think based on my reporting that is a high likelihood. There is, as we've talked about, in Seminole County, it was 82% of voters who said yes to the supermajority part of it, to go ahead and add that in there. And so this is something that, it's politically popular. It is not a traditionally Republican, Democrat, left-right situation. This one kind of goes across a lot of traditional party lines. And so the county commissioners themselves have an appetite for making sure that their rural boundary in the charter stays. So I do think it is a high likelihood that this would end up in court.
And presumably, if such an amendment were to fail, you would probably see developers as well continuing that push. I mean, this isn't an argument that's going away anytime soon either way.
No, there are several properties that have been the target of development in Seminole County that are in that rural boundary over the years. And, we know that there has been interest in renewing some of those talks, and where that potentially comes out, I would not be surprised to see those come back up again in the future as well.
Well, this ties in with some other issues, Molly. There really are a myriad opinions on development, as we're a very fast-growing state. One of those big issues on development came up in the last session. This was a bill called SB 180 that did pass. As you've reported since the last legislative session, SB 180, Molly, makes it much harder now for counties to implement things like rural boundaries, comprehensive plans like Orange County's Vision 2050. Just remind us, if you can, what that did in the first place.
SB 180, yep, that's a name I've become very familiar with. So this bill began as an emergency management bill. It began as an effort to try to help communities rebuild more quickly after storms. Towards the end of the session last year, there was more language added in. It was approved, and so basically...
So the background was that we had several serious hurricanes that caused a lot of damage, particularly in western parts of the state.
Yeah, Hurricane Milton, Hurricane Debbie, Helene.
Yeah.
In recent years, we've had a lot of big storms that affected, the entire state. So, even though the bill was written, it's going to affect local governments within X miles of the eye of the storm. Effectively, that covers the entire state because every county was affected by at least one of those storms mentioned in the law. So you've got this preemptive bill stopping local governments from being able to enact anything that is more burdensome or restrictive or maybe it's more restrictive or burdensome. I can't remember what
Sure.
order they're in. But that phrase is not defined in the law itself. So it kind of just gives an open pass to anybody. I mean, you don't even have to be a Florida resident to sue under this bill. And developers have been filing lawsuits. Lawyers have been filing lawsuits on behalf of developers in response. And Vision 2050 was Orange County's kind of overhaul, like comprehensive plan
yeah.
and development code, like overhaul. So they were really trying to prioritize that sustainable growth framework, like direct the more heavy, high-density development to urbanized areas, keep the rural areas rural, making more walkable communities, all kinds of things in there. And some of the things in there as well, kind of spelling out rules and policies that already existed, but just codifying those. So the state came and said that's null and void very shortly after they had approved it. After, I believe they said tens of thousands of hours of work had gone into it, 8 years they'd been working on it. And they said, they took issue with it, including some of the policies that had already existed before.
Because of SB 180.
Because of SB 180, yes.
Well, so the authors of SB 180, though, had sort of subsequently said, well, maybe there are some unintended consequences from this bill that maybe we could go back and correct. There have been some efforts to roll back some of those restrictions on local government's abilities to control development and growth. How does that rollback effort look at this point as of Tuesday morning? Right.
So the main proposal that lawmakers have put together to try to fix some of the issues with SB 180, which I think is worth kind of pointing out, or resting on that for even a minute, is this has been a widely unpopular bill on both sides, and even folks who were behind the bill have said, we didn't know that it was going to be this drastic. So the main fix is Senate Bill 840, and it has cleared the Senate, the necessary Senate committee stops. I believe it's actually cleared the Senate, but it was read for the first time in the House last Monday. So it's been a little over a week, and I don't believe that it has moved since then. So some folks are getting worried that there might not actually be a fix to 180 coming out of this legislative session. Now, in itself, SB 840 doesn't completely undo all of the concerns people have with SB 180, but it does narrow the scope a bit. It does shorten the duration of time that it would be effective, and it does limit some of SB 180's more concerning aspects for people.
And some of the reporting seems to suggest at this point that it's unlikely. We'll put links to Molly and Abe's reporting on rural boundaries in the podcast feed show notes. Abe Aboraya from the Oviedo Community News. Thanks so much for coming on, Abe.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Molly, stick around. We're going to talk a little bit more about your reporting on the environment in just a moment. Meantime, be sure to like and subscribe to Talking Central Florida. You can listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and watch on YouTube at Talking Central Florida. Well, Molly Duerig, Central Florida Public Media's environment reporter, is still with me here in the studio. I want to talk in a bit more depth about an issue we touched on last week's program with Ryan Lynch from the Orlando Business Journal, and that's the matter of some conservation land near the Split Oak Forest. This land is part of plans for the construction of the State Road 534 Expressway project. Let's start by taking a step back on this one, Molly. You reported in January that Orange County commissioners voted to reject an offer from the Central Florida Expressway Authority to buy about 24 acres of conservation land, including a part of what's known as Eagle's Roost, which is near the Split Oak Forest. Tell us about Eagle's Roost, and what does CFX want the land for?
Right. So Eagle's Roost is a very large, I think, 232-acre park. It is a protected green place park. That's Orange County's name for like their park program and their protected lands. So it sits right across the street from Split Oak Forest, and also on property is the Back to Nature Wildlife Refuge, which just recently reopened a little less than a year ago. So lots of animals living there.
Sure.
And CFX wants just under 3 acres. So putting it in context, it's 232 acres. They're just trying to get 3 acres of it. And this is a little under 3 acres. And they want to own those just under 3 acres outright. They say they need it for the road that they're building, the toll road, State Road 534, which is part of a larger kind of Southern Beltway project. It's like a regional transportation project for the region. But that one particular stood out for folks because it's obviously a green place park that Orange County set aside for conservation. So even though it is a very small portion, conservation is set aside in perpetuity. So that's sort of the...
Yeah. I mean, the Expressway Authority has now filed an eminent domain claim. That came just recently for that conservation land. What does that mean happens now at this point?
Yes, we were talking about taking earlier. So
Yeah.
eminent domain is a good example of sort of the framework that exists for government entities. And CFX is one. They're an independent state agency. So it is a process by which local governments can take land. And if it is declared necessary for a public purpose. And in many prior cases, that and in this one, that public purpose has been eroded. So generally, once there's like a whole process that unfolds. But essentially, we were just talking about how Orange County rejected the offer. One of the first steps in the process, depending how you want to define it, is a written offer. So if government entity or public entity, in this case, CFX, has to be operating in good faith. So they're going to give a written offer to Orange County for the land. Like, we're going to give you X amount of dollars. I think it was $2.4 million they were offering for all of that land. And so that's to show good faith, we want to work with you.
Sure.
And at that point, the county could either say, sure, let's negotiate, let's talk about this and maybe come to a different understanding of like money, maybe give us some more land in exchange or something like that. Or they can say, you know what, we don't want to negotiate. And that's what they said. They said, we don't want to negotiate. And then there's like a 30-day period they had to respond. And then as soon as that time was up, CFX could file in court to begin the legal process. And that's what they did.
I mean, a lot of the State Road 534 controversy, right, and you and I have talked about this before many times, centers on the split oak forest. That was set aside, I think, for conservation decades ago, correct? I mean, the route has been redrawn to cut through less of that forest than the initial plans had envisaged. It will intersect part of it, I think, though, in Osceola County. There have also been conservation land donations made elsewhere. So what are conservationists concerned about here? I mean, you mentioned with the Eagle's Roost, it's just a very small amount, about 3 acres. There's just a small corner of the split oak forest that's going to be intersected by 534 according to these current plans. Why are conservationists so concerned about what seems to be, on the face of it, a pretty small amount of land?
Right. Very, very good question. Very good point. So, and just to clarify, there's a 1,550 acres has been promised by CFX as donation land in exchange. And that land would be connected to split oak forest. And so it would create more contiguous land, which that's really important for wildlife corridors, for animals, for wildlife people to traverse, for ecosystems. Okay, so that's great. However, there are still concerns because even conservationists say, number one, this land was set aside in perpetuity. This land was supposed to be some of the most protected land in Florida, split oak forest. You've got the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. You've got Water Management District interests. You've got local governments, everybody dedicated. You've got the Florida Communities Trust. So many layers of protection. Perpetuity means forever. So even if it is a small amount, just that idea in general really bugs people because it could set a precedent.
It's a precedent issue. Okay.
Well, we could just do whatever we want with any of the conservation land. What does that really mean? So I just want to start there. Other things. So yes, just under 3 acres. But when you think about like a highway, like a toll road, that's a big kind of beast of a thing. I mean, it's not just going to kind of trickle in there and not going to notice it. Like, there's going to be a lot of construction. There's going to be noise pollution, light pollution. I will say, I guess, in light of those concerns, CFX says that they're not going to have any lighting in the portions that go through the forest. So as to try and mitigate that concern. And there's going to be some wildlife bridges. Some portions of the road will go above some trails. People will be able to go under. Horseback riders, animals can go under. So they definitely have been listening to the community and trying to accommodate. However, again, there's just a lot of concern with the idea that conservation land could be set aside forever, but then actually we've decided, never mind, we don't want to set it aside for forever. So another just real key point, the last thing I'm going to say, 1,550 acres that's been promised, folks have really said, that land is not very high quality. It's not a 1-for-1. It's not going to replace the gorgeous conservation land in split oak forest. But of course, split oak forest itself was originally set aside for mitigation and then had to be restored. So there could be some work done to make the land higher quality, but that's another concern people have.
And of course, there are roads that go through other environmentally sensitive areas, and this is a balancing act, I guess, we have in a state that's so fast growing, the population is growing so fast. I mean, looking ahead, though, just to close out this part, there is a hearing scheduled, I think, in the coming months on this eminent domain case in June. What are the key questions that the court's likely going to have to decide here? So
CFX, it is, we have heard from some eminent domain attorneys that it can be very difficult to defeat an eminent domain case because you kind of have to prove like that the agency is working in bad faith, trying to pursue it in bad faith. So that can be very hard to prove. So basically what CFX needs to do is prove a public purpose and a reasonable need for the taking, like that we really need this road, like the public needs this road. And good faith that they went about it, they got the property appraised in good faith, they made a good faith offer. They have to show that they considered the availability of an alternate route, which, as we've mentioned, there's been a lot of alternate routes considered. They have to show that they've considered environmental factors, long-range area planning, and safety considerations and costs. So these are the things, effectively what they're going to be looking at is this a public purpose, and has CFX acted in bad faith or good faith throughout this situation.
And I'm sure you'll be keeping an eye on that for sure. Well, talking about the issues of infrastructure and conservation, Orange County leaders have decided voters won't get a new sales tax on the November ballot, at least for now. What have commissioners been eyeing for this year, Molly? And how was it different from the earlier sales tax initiative in Orange County that failed in 22?
2022's tax was very specifically focused on transportation. This one that was being just considered, and the Trust for Public Land, a national nonprofit, was helping the county at no cost to the county look into this option and kind of poll to get a sense of, would this be popular if they put it forward for the ballot this year? Would people even want it? Because we know conservation land is really important in Orange County, and that's actually the main reason that Orange County Commissioner Nicole Wilson brought up the idea for this sales tax.
The
was
District 1
infrastructure, but also conservation land. We're seeing these issues with conservation land. Like, is there a way that that we can tax ourselves and really have a long, sustainable, long-term plan for funding the acquisition of conservation land? But it could also fund other things. So it seemed the commissioners weren't all necessarily on the same page about what it would fund, how to describe what it would fund. The acquisition of land for affordable housing was one thing that it could fund, but there's something in state statute that requires you to do economic development projects if you do that. So the language that was being presented included all of this stuff. It'll fund this, and that. And it was sort of they weren't sure if that would be good or if it would overwhelm people and be what is this? Then there's also the concerns some have raised, what happens when we set land aside for conservation now? Doesn't even necessarily always mean that it stays that way. Are voters going to want to pay for something that isn't going to stay that way? So a lot of it came down to it's too soon. They'd have to really hurry and get that together. I think April, get the language
There's a
confirmed.
big process to go through if you want to get that on the ballot. But it seems like there was some disagreement about what such a sales tax would pay for, but also, I guess, some concern that this would be a tough sell. I mean, we've seen Orange County voters and voters in many other places, have looked askance at these kinds of sales tax initiatives. Were commissioners concerned that maybe this would be too much of an ask of voters during a time of high cost of living? Right.
Yeah, that's a really important point. So I'm glad you brought that up. Costs are going up. There's discussions that have been going on about a major property tax overhaul that would really leave local governments in a very uncertain place if that were to go through. Now, I don't know that it's going to at this point, but there's been a lot of discussion about seriously reducing or getting rid of most, if not all, property taxes in the state. So that would leave local governments with quite a conundrum as how to fund their basic public services. Maybe this tax could be a way, but maybe it also would be, unwelcome by the voters. I'd say most of the opposition came from Orange County Mayor Jerry Demings. He was bringing up, we got all this high cost of living and now we're going to tax you more,
Sure. And now Orange County Mayor Jerry Demings, of course, running for the Democratic nomination for governor, which is another part of the political dynamic. Before we go, we should discuss the drought, how bad it is right now in our state and in the region.
Right. It's reportedly one of the worst droughts in the state since 2001. We do have a state of emergency that was declared for all 67 counties following the cold snap, which contributed to the drought by freezing vegetation and making it easier for those to catch on fire. Had a lot of wildfires going on. I wanted to put into context that I'm looking at the U.S. Drought Monitor. They update that every week. And so as of this day, it's we're coming right before they're about to update it again. So the data is good as of March 3rd at 7 a.m.
Yeah.
But 70% of Florida is in an extreme drought as of that time, which is the second worst level of drought. And the whole state is in some level of drought. We've got water shortages declared, including St. Johns River Water Management District, parts of that area, parts of other parts of the state. Tampa Bay Water has stopped drawing from local rivers. They are relying, this is actually really a good point. Yeah. They're relying only on groundwater and their desalination plant. And the utilities chief science officer said, there's 3 months left in dry season, okay? And they have drained more than half of their savings in their reservoir. So total 15.5 billion gallons the reservoir can hold. Right now, they're down to 7. And usually they'd only just be starting to draw from it now. I've been covering a lot of discussion as well locally about potable reuse, about direct potable reuse, which is basically using recycled treated wastewater for drinking. We already use reclaimed water a lot here in Florida for irrigation, and we have a lot of indirect potable reuse happening, which it effectively is going back into the supply, but after being filtered through rivers and lakes and through the groundwater. This is different. This is like putting it directly into the water supply. It is allowed in Florida. It hasn't happened yet. But I'm saying all this because some people who don't like that idea of what they call toilet to tap, that's not what it is. There's many more steps involved, but people who are worried about that, they say, let's go to desalination. Why don't we do that instead? So we might be hearing more about it as people are talking.
Well, we'll put a link up to the Drought Monitor website that you talk about there so people can see them for themselves, the latest data. What do we know about the length of the duration of this drought? Do forecasters think it's going to continue?
It sounds like, it sounds like it could go on for a bit longer. People are worried about agriculture. People are worried about the citrus, the blueberries, the crops that have been affected. And we do have
because there was just a big freeze.
Yes, the freeze made it worse. The freeze dried out the vegetation and made it easier to catch on fire. And I guess there's 3 months left in the dry season as of now. So with some areas already, draining their reserves, it's definitely a concern. So we're hoping for more rain soon, but it could go on. It could go on longer.
Well, we'll put links to your reporting as well in the podcast feed. Show notes. Molly Duerig, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time. Be sure to join us on social media for more discussion on the reporting we're talking about on the show. We're at Talking Central Florida on Instagram and Facebook. A reminder, you can support Talking Central Florida by clicking like and subscribe. Listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Talking Central Florida is a production of the News Collaborative of Central Florida with support from the Orlando Sentinel, the Winter Park Voice, the Central Florida Foundation, and Central Florida Public Media, where the show is recorded. We'll be back with a new episode next Wednesday. Until then, take care and have a great week.